Hi, I'm Andrew Lissamore, CEO of Headphones.com. You might not know me because I don't usually show up in these videos, but I made an exception for this one because I think we're talking about something really important. So here's what happened. Cameron produced a video back in 2021 that a manufacturer didn't like, and that manufacturer is DCS. And DCS since then has threatened Cameron with litigation. And this is exactly the kind of behavior that we don't want to see in our industry, because it makes it really hard for a creator to be honest about what they're thinking about a product or what they discover about a product publicly without fear of retaliation. And that can really hamper the really open and great dialogue we have about products publicly. And we don't want to be supporting a company that thinks that this type of action towards a reviewer is okay. This is really hard for us to do, and it's a hard video to make because DCS is a company that we work with and that we've appreciated working with, but also on the balance of things, we felt like we needed to take action. So Headphones.com is going to end our relationship with DCS, and we're no longer going to sell their products because there's a real misalignment in terms of our values. And we don't want to be supporting a company that thinks that this type of action towards a reviewer is okay. The behavior of DCS in this case is something that sets a really dangerous precedent. And that's a precedent that doesn't only affect us or our team, it affects everyone in the industry. And our company, we feel really fortunate to have built what we did. We started this company, I think 8 years ago now, and it was just my brother and I at the beginning, and it's become more than we ever could have imagined. And a lot of that experience that we've had has been alongside an incredible team of creators that we've built, and Cameron is one of those. And we have a long history of supporting those creators and helping them to be able to express their true and honest opinions about products. And so when something like this happens, it really strikes to the core of our values as a company, and I think something that would be a lot easier to be quiet about and not address publicly. Certainly, I think in the short term there's a lot of risk to our company by being public about this, but I think it's something that's so important that we make sure never happens again to anyone else who is expressing their opinion about a product. It's really important that not only our team members but also reviewers at large are really comfortable expressing their opinions publicly, especially if there's no malice behind their opinions. They're really trying to get to the truth of what a product is and why it's good for some people and not others, or if they're trying to look at how a company is marketing something and whether or not that marketing is truthful or not. I think those are really important functions. And so in this case, I think having a really threatening response to someone who's trying to review a product is really damaging to this whole community and industry that we really love. And now Cameron is going to dive into the details and walk you guys through exactly what's happened.
Hey everyone, so this is going to be a little bit long, but I'm going to go through exactly what has happened up until now. In December of 2021, I published a review of the DCS Bartok, and recently I have received communication from a lawyer acting on behalf of DCS, demanding that my review be removed or significantly amended, else DCS will be forced to exercise its remedies to protect its interests, including the recovery of actual and special damages and punitive damages, i.e. remove or heavily amend your review or we will sue. This is not the first time that a manufacturer has threatened to sue a reviewer over a negative review or coverage of their products, and unfortunately it probably won't be the last. But whilst I understand that a manufacturer is not going to be particularly pleased about a review being published saying that their product wasn't great value, resorting to legal threats rather than a constructive discussion with the person to try to address factual inaccuracies that they feel are present is, in my opinion, bullying on a corporate scale and damaging to both the community and the reviewing space as a whole. And this video is being made because this is an important issue to talk about. Reviewers like me aren't big companies with big budgets, and the threat of an expensive legal defense, even if you do feel that you're in the right, and even if you do win your case, is pretty daunting and immensely stressful. I've had a rough few weeks because of this, and in situations like what we saw with Aaron's Audio Corner and Tecton recently, the threat and financial stress is significant regardless of the validity of the claim. And for many, they may feel that they simply have no choice but to just comply with the demands being made. And if reviewers are scared of speaking their honest thoughts and giving criticism of products for fear of being sued, we as a community don't get fair and honest coverage or reviews. I've always tried my absolute best to provide comprehensive and honest feedback of the products that I test. I've never used an affiliate link. I have never taken a sponsorship from any of the manufacturers of products that I review or competitors to the products that I review. And so altering what I say about a product based on demands from a manufacturer would also be quite contrary to that. Now, for obvious reasons, I'm going to be a little bit careful about what I say in this video, and I'm making this video because I believe it is of genuine newsworthiness, something that the community should be aware of, and something that's important to talk about, lest other manufacturers try the same tactics and this becomes a more widespread issue. I'm going to be as transparent as possible and share the full emails that are being discussed so that you know that nothing is being skewed, and I'm going to go through each of the objections that DCS has made, share my thoughts on them, and for some of them, I've also had some input from some prominent industry figures, so I'll share their thoughts on them too. My review of the DCS Bartok was published in December of 2021, and there is a link in the description to both the video and the written measurement article as well if you'd like to view them for full context. And that unit was loaned to me by a friend. It was not from DCS, and I had no communication with DCS during the production of that video. And unfortunately, I wasn't really a fan of the product. The review was overall pretty negative. In February of 2023, a couple years later, I was chatting in my Patreon supporters chat and discussing my experience with the DCS Lina, which had been very positive. I liked the Lina DAC quite a lot, and I also found that enabling the external clock made quite a surprising improvement to the sound quality. The difference was clear enough that we were discussing some of the possibilities as to why this might be, and one of my supporters also asked about what other DACs it might be able to use the Lina clock with, given as based on my impressions it was seemingly very good. And I posted a voice message explaining that you would only be able to use it with other DACs that have a word clock input. DCS is one of the few companies that are doing external clocks in the way that today I would personally consider to be correct, i.e. using actual audio rate word clocks, not 10 megahertz clocks. And in that voice message, I expressed hope that in future, more manufacturers would do things in the way that DCS is doing. And I also said that given the stark difference in sound quality, I'd be curious to get a unit of the Lina in to test and see what exactly was changing. Was it genuinely just a big improvement in jitter or phase noise, or was it doing some other DSP or something differently when you had the external clock connected? And the reason I brought that up is because shortly before all this happened, I had tested a product from another manufacturer that when you connected an external clock to it, did actually apply some resampling. It was altering the digital data, therefore providing a difference in sound quality besides the improvement or change in jitter itself. But whilst discussing this possibility in that voice message, I made very clear that this was just a possibility that would be interesting to test, and that there was nothing suggesting this was actually happening. This was the disclaimer that I said in that voice message.
Not saying that they are doing this, just to be very clear, and I don't have anything to suggest that they are.
Then an individual with a bit of a grudge against myself took a small snippet of that voice message, less than 20 seconds of the nearly 2-minute long voice message, excluding that disclaimer and excluding the entire context of us discussing my positive impressions of the Lina, and posted a small part to Twitter to try to make it look like I was saying that the Lina was doing some kind of additional DSP when you had the clock connected. But I was very clearly not saying that. I was very clear about that in the voice message itself, and I've also not had an opportunity to test or measure a DCS Lina and wouldn't make such a claim without doing so. In October of 2023, I received an email informing me that a representative of DCS was very concerned about the post made on Twitter, which at the time of recording has a grand total of 269 views. I sent him an email to explain the context of the voice message. I explained that I was not at all saying that DCS was doing anything nefarious, and in fact the context of the discussion was me being very positive about the Lina DAC and clock, and that the possibility was only being discussed because I had recently tested a product not from DCS, and it turns out that that product was applying some additional DSP when connected to an external clock. I also sent over the full voice message so that he could see the context of what was actually being said. His reply was quite simple. The history of your YouTube and this post do indeed contain gross misinformation that is both inflammatory and directly damaging to our reputation. Information that you could have easily verified had you taken the time. Words are one thing, your behavior another. My perspective and understanding of your motives is based on your behavior, which clearly seems that you have an agenda, one that damages DCS. To be very clear, I have absolutely no kind of agenda or grudge against DCS. I have reviewed a grand total of 1 DCS product, and unfortunately I wasn't particularly enamored with it, but my impressions of some of their other products, both at the higher end and the Lina itself, have been much more positive. And in fact, outside of reviews, I've regularly spoken quite positively about various things that DCS does, such as their approach to external clocks, the benefits of the ring DAC itself, or even superficial things like the fact that their DACs have some of the best build quality available on the market. I then responded explaining that whilst I understand DCS may not agree with my subjective findings on the product or be particularly pleased about a negative review being posted, those were my honest opinions, and I have absolutely no grudge or agenda against DCS. In fact, I was quite looking forward to reviewing the Lina as I discussed with DCS at a recent show, because my impressions of that were very positive. I then said, misinformation and objectively false statements, however, are absolutely not something I want to be publishing, and if something I say is shown to be false, I would very much like to correct the record. Would you be able to let me know which statements or parts of media I have published are ones you feel are definitively incorrect? I would be happy to discuss these with you and remove them, or correct the record if I have published something incorrect. I then received a response which did not answer my question or provide any further information as to what in either my video or written article was factually incorrect, instead providing several paragraphs reasserting that I was being dishonest, misrepresenting DCS, being overtly malicious, and finishing with, I have no insight into what motivates your irresponsible and overtly malicious behavior. I am neither your mummy nor your therapist. But you can bank on the fact that I will do all within my power to prevent people like you from lying about a company I love. As I'm sure you can understand, we can no longer stand by and allow you to deceive your audience at our expense. He then sent a follow-up, providing a particular quote from my previous email stating that it was patently false. I then replied to make clear, as I thought was the case in my original email, that statement about a device behaving differently with an external clock connected was not in relation to the Lina. It was in reference to a different product from a different manufacturer that I tested shortly before all this happened. And that was simply the reason as to why I'd be curious to test whether the Lina may be doing something similar, but as clearly stated, I am not implying that DCS is doing this, and have nothing to suggest that they are. I had not measured a Lina myself, and I would not make such a claim without doing so. After some further email exchange, which you can read in full on screen, and the points of issue I will discuss shortly, I finished with, as what I hope will be seen as a positive gesture, I have set the video to private so that it is not publicly visible. If you would let me know which specific parts of the video you feel are inaccurate, I will look and remove them. I publish a mix of my own subjective evaluations of products and objective descriptions and measurements, and on that latter part in particular, I am not interested in publishing incorrect information. And in the past, when I've made a mistake, usually what happens is the manufacturer reaches out to me and says, hey, we think you got this wrong, would you mind correcting it? And if it is indeed incorrect, I will do that, either by pinning a comment, amending the description, amending the written article, or if necessary, just cutting that part out of the video entirely. And usually that's the end of it. If I've made a mistake, tell me and I will correct it, but I can't do that unless you actually tell me what you feel is incorrect. Just saying that the whole video that I myself am dishonest doesn't help. I didn't receive a response to that email. No further information about what DCS felt was incorrect about my review, so without any further information, there was nothing else I was able to correct, and after a few weeks of radio silence, I put the video back up. That was in October of last year, and recently, nearly 7 months later, I received a letter from a lawyer acting on behalf of DCS stating the following. In the matter of reviews you have published on multiple media regarding DCS products, unfortunately, these reviews are false and misleading, and have damaged DCS reputation as well as caused direct economic damage to DCS. DCS welcomes reviews of its products that are honest and accurate. However, DCS spends significant resources in the development, testing, marketing, and production of its products, and these products are considered premium, top-of-the-line products in the industry. So when the reviews are reckless and not truthful or factually based, DCS must protect its reputation and economic interests. Accordingly, DCS demands that you either revise the published reviews of DCS products to make them accurate, or terminate publication of these reviews to avoid any further economic and reputation risk to DCS. In addition, GoldenSound needs to take appropriate action to correct the false statements in its reviews and conspicuously notify all readers and listeners of such corrected statements. All such action needs to be taken within 10 days of the date of this email. If GoldenSound fails to comply with this demand, DCS will be forced to exercise its remedies to protect its interests, including the recovery of actual and special damages and punitive damages. At last, some specifics are provided in this communication about what exactly DCS feels is incorrect about my review. It's a shame that this came through a lawyer with an attached threat to sue if I don't remove the video almost immediately, rather than just answering the question when I'd asked several times 7 months before this. But with these points provided, I will talk through each of them. The review states at 625 that the Bartok is a Delta Sigma DAC. This is incorrect. The Bartok is a thermometer-coded DAC fed with 5-bit PCM audio, not PDM. This has been well documented, including through a white paper available on the DCS website. See link attached. I never said that the Bartok was a 1-bit or PDM DAC. I said that it was a Delta Sigma DAC. And if we look at the white paper that was linked, we can see that there is almost a full page explaining how the DCS ring DAC modulates incoming data to 5-bit and between 2.822 and 6.144 MHz. The term Delta Sigma does not exclusively refer to 1-bit or PDM designs, and in fact, most Delta Sigma DACs on the market, including the main OEM manufacturers like AKM, Burr Brown, and ESS, are all multi-bit Delta Sigma designs of various topologies. Being Delta Sigma is simply referring to the fact that this DAC can't convert PCM samples natively at 16 or 24-bit in the way that an R2R DAC can, for instance. It relies on Delta Sigma modulation or noise shaping to convert the incoming high bit depth, low sample rate information to a lower bit depth, higher sample rate format, as is described by your own white paper. On this point, I also reached out to Jussi Laako, who, for those who don't know, is the creator of the software Signalyst HQ Player. He designs high-performance Delta Sigma modulators. He's been involved in the development of products like the Ferrum Wandler, and he's actually also designed and open-sourced his own Delta Sigma DAC design, so he's one of the most ideal subject matter experts to talk to about this. And he stated, "Thermometer code is not PCM. It is the typical output of a Sigma Delta modulated DAC. You can just point them at one of the many DAC chip datasheets that talk about multi-bit Delta Sigma, such as the Cirrus CS43198 or the AKM AK4191, which obviously has multi-bit output. Generally speaking, if it has a Delta Sigma modulator, then it is a Delta Sigma DAC. If their DAC would be a PCM DAC, it would have run the conversion section using an R2R sign magnitude design with power of 2 input data, instead of unity-weighted thermometer code array. But R2R is not run by a thermometer code. Thermometer code is used specifically to run Sigma Delta modulated digital to analog conversion sections where the elements are not power of 2 weighted and don't necessarily have power of 2 number of levels or elements. And just to be absolutely certain, I asked, can you see any reason as to why DCS's approach would not be fairly described as a Delta Sigma design? To which he responded, to me, it is a classical Delta Sigma DAC design. And he also noted the similarities between the operation of the DCS ring DAC and the AKM DAC chips internally. So thank you very much, Jussi, for your input on this point. I really appreciate it. Point number 2. The written section states that the Bartok has 6 filters. At the time of review, the Bartok had, and still has, 42 user-selectable PCM filters. In the UI for the Bartok, in the product manual for the Bartok, and on DCS's own webpage for the Bartok, there are 6 different PCM filters described. 7 if you also count one that only shows up when you're playing MQA content, not regular PCM. So exactly how this 42 filter figure has been obtained, I'm really not sure, but given as all resources, including DCS's own information, all point to 6 filters being available, I don't feel that this point is valid. Point number 3. In the review, I stated that the Bartok has the option to use an external 10 MHz clock, when in fact it does not. It only accepts an external word clock input. This was incorrect, I was mistaken about this, and so I've pinned a comment to the video and amended the description to clarify this. Had this been pointed out 7 months ago when I'd asked for the information several times, I would have corrected it then, but nevertheless, now that it has been pointed out, I have corrected it. Point number 4. The review states that DSD upsampling in the Bartok adds a quite frankly ridiculous amount of ultrasonic noise. This shows a lack of understanding of the implications of DSD64, single-speed DSD, as a format. Further on, a linearity sweep is carried out without a bandpass filter enabled, with conclusions drawn about the linearity of the product and the DSD upsampling from it. A linearity sweep without a bandpass filter is not a valid test. Addressing that second part firstly, I fail to understand how a linearity sweep without a bandpass filter is in any way an invalid test. It is a useful way to show how noise dominates the output signal in a more visually accurate manner than using an FFT. And actually, Amir from AudioScienceReview has a very good video on this subject and the topic of FFT gain, so if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about this, go and watch that video. Secondly, I did provide a linearity test with a bandpass filter. In fact, I provided that one first. I always provide both of these measurements for any DAC that I test and clearly label both because they show different things. But to be sure, I reached out to Amir from AudioScienceReview. Amir has published measurements for more DACs and amplifiers than anyone else in the world, so he's quite an ideal person to speak on this topic. And I should also mention that Amir and I have had our differences in the past. I'm actually banned from AudioScienceReview, and so this is not at all a case of Amir defending a friend or anything. This is Amir's honest input, and I think, if anything, as a result of the history, carries more weight. So I'm very grateful for Amir's input on this. And Amir said, On your questions, here is my stance. Linearity. Your position is absolutely correct. You are showing two tests that are conducted objectively with no error in protocol. They can argue the usefulness of non-filtered linearity tests, but that is no cause whatsoever to force you to delete that test. It is another way of showing the profile of rising noise. They are welcome to post on their site as a response to the value of such tests, but that would be that. Going back to that first point about the DSD oversampling and the Bartok adding a lot of ultrasonic noise, they don't actually state that I'm incorrect here. They're seemingly just annoyed that the challenges of DSD64 as a format weren't discussed in addition. But the default DSD oversampling mode on the Bartok does add a huge amount of ultrasonic noise. Here are the measurements for PCM output, and here are the measurements for DSD output. There is a huge amount more ultrasonic noise, in particular, very close to the audible band. I'm fully aware of the challenges of DSD, particularly at low rates, but the point is that there are other products at and below the Bartok's price point that have mitigated these challenges. To take one that is similar in price, the Meitner MA3, this mitigates this issue to a large extent by just upsampling to a higher DSD rate, resulting in the noise being much further out in frequency and lower in overall level. And a product at a much lower price point, the Hollow Audio May, also has much lower ultrasonic noise, even just when using its own internal DSD upsampling off of an AKM resampling chip, possibly again due to just oversampling to a higher DSD rate, and possibly because its DSD converter actually is a moving average FAR filter design with a large number of elements, and that inherently filters out some of this ultrasonic noise. I understand that DSD64 has challenges, so you could, in a product as expensive as this, either just upsample to a higher rate or implement a more effective physical solution to mitigate them. If you don't, it is completely fair for reviewers to point out that this may have undesirable effects. The DCS Bartok's DSD upsampling mode produces drastically more ultrasonic noise than the PCM upsampling mode, and there are other products at and below its price point which, when upsampling to DSD, produce quite a bit less ultrasonic noise. That's not my opinion, the measurements are very clear. And on this point, Amir also did give some input. On DSD conversion, what there is copious amounts of ultrasonic noise. That it is a function of the format is besides the point. The viewer of your video may not at all know that this can happen, and so badly with DSD64. For their part, they could have warned the user of their product that this mode was an ultrasonic noise generator, but I suspect they have not. In that regard, your review objectively shows this. Your comment that it is a lot of noise is your opinion, and they don't get to override that with their opinion. So thank you very much, Amir from Audio Science Review, for providing your inputs and support on this point. I really appreciate it. Following on from my criticism of the DSD upsampling in the Bartok and its performance, part of the issue I talked about in the review was that this is the default mode. So when you factory reset the device, for instance, it is running in an objectively poorer performing way. In this letter, DCS states, the DCS Bartok's default mode is to upsample to DXD, high sample rate PCM, not DSD, whereas in the video I'd said that it was DSD. This point is simply not true. I factory reset the Bartok when I received it. That is the first thing that I will do with any product that comes in for review if it has that option, and when I did so, it was in single speed DSD upsampling mode. And to confirm this, I visited a friend who has a unit and showed that even on the newer firmware, when you factory reset it, it goes into DSD single speed upsampling mode. We go into audio settings, set this to F3, change the unit settings, so map to, set it back to 0.2 volts just to be sure, and I'm going to put it on DXD, so PCM upsampling. And now if we factory reset again, so we can see the filter has reset, the map has reset, the output voltage has reset. It is back to DSD. So if you factory reset it, it does change to DSD mode. DSD mode is the default. So no, this point is invalid, and what I said in the video is correct. Next point. In the review I stated, the DCS Bartok can be set to use the clock information from an audio source device as a reference, or buffer and reclock the source using the DAC's own internal clock, whereas DCS contends that the Bartok will always buffer and reclock from an external source. I don't have a unit that I can measure to verify or disprove this claim, so I can't really speak too much on this particular point. If this is incorrect, I apologize. This was my understanding from the documentation in the product manual. But I'm saying here that the Bartok has an additional feature to choose between these two methods of behavior, whereas DCS is saying that it does not have that feature. And I fail to see how me falsely embellishing a product by giving it an additional feature it does not have is in any way damaging or defamatory. During filming of the review, the Bartok was set to master clock mode whilst connected to an SPDIF source, and DCS states that this is not the correct setup for the device. The reason that the DAC was in master clock mode was because throughout the weeks of evaluation that I'd done before actually filming the review, both when subjectively listening and when objectively measuring and gathering data, I'd exclusively used it in either USB input mode or network streaming mode, for both of which the manual states that you should set it to master clock mode. That is the correct setup, that is how my subjective opinions were formed, and how all of the objective data was gathered. When I went to film the review itself, I picked up the DAC off the rack that I'd been using it on, set it on the desk where I would be filming, put the DAC in SPDIF input mode so that I could feed both it and a visualizer as a visual prop from the same DDC, something I've been doing regularly in videos around that time, and everything was working fine, so I didn't think anything further of it. All of the subjective opinions presented in that video and all of the objective data that was gathered with the DAC set up and operating correctly. I spend weeks evaluating a product before I sit down and film the review, and my opinions are not formed live whilst recording, nor are products evaluated in exactly the same setup and location that either the A-roll or the B-roll for the video is filmed. The videos are scripted, they are written ahead of time, and then I sit down and film. So this is not a valid counterpoint or criticism to my own subjective opinion presented in the video, because it had absolutely no effect on the contents of the video. Finally, they also then revisit the issue of the voice message and the Lina clock and state that the implication is categorically untrue and unfounded, which is fine. I don't disagree because I did not say or imply that. I was very clear in the voice message that I don't suspect DCS is doing this, and there's nothing to suggest that they are. The only reason that this representative came away with this understanding is because a third party maliciously took a small portion of the whole message, explicitly excluding that disclaimer and the entire surrounding context of what we were talking about, which was me being very positive about the Lina DAC and clock, to make the message sound more nefarious. This snippet doesn't represent my belief, and I had reported it to Twitter, but of course it's Twitter, so nothing was done. In my previous direct communications with DCS, I had repeatedly asked for information about what they thought was factually inaccurate about my review. I'd even taken the video down as a gesture of good faith, but it wasn't until well over 2 years after the video was released and 7 months after I'd asked several times, please tell me what is wrong and I will correct it, that they finally tell me what they had an issue with, and it's through a lawyer with an attached threat to sue. However, I disagree with almost all of the points that DCS has made, and my personal opinion is that threatening to sue someone over a negative review unless they take it down is damaging and unethical. And there are other reviews out there that have dared to say similar points as me, such as that the DAC has 6 filters that, to my knowledge, have not had the same kind of response from DCS. And couple that with the fact that many of the objections DCS is making here are simply demonstrably wrong, and the one that I do agree was a mistake on my part, the 10 MHz clock input, I disagree with that being damaging or defamatory in the first place, let alone enough to be sued over. I can't help but feel that this is simply because I didn't like the product, and that if my impressions were more positive, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. If you genuinely just want to correct factual inaccuracies, the behavior of DCS and failure to provide any information that would allow me to do so, even when asked several times, is quite contrary to that aim. We saw a similar situation to this recently with Tecton threatening to sue Erin's Audio Corner over a less than positive review of their speakers, and luckily Tecton doesn't seem to have pushed that any further than the initial communication. And the easiest thing to do here would have just been to comply with DCS's demands, take down the video and avoid the whole headache. But this video is being made because this sort of behavior sets a really dangerous precedent. If manufacturers can just threaten to sue any reviewer that publishes a negative review of their product, we as a community do not get fair and honest coverage or reviews of products. How can you, when a reviewer knows that if they're not positive about something, particularly for a big brand, they could just put them in financial ruin? And additionally, if as a manufacturer your response to negative coverage is legal threats, how can anyone possibly trust the positive coverage that you do allow to exist? A reviewer's job is to serve the customer, not the manufacturer. It is my job to provide my comprehensive and honest analysis and opinion of products to help the customer make the best choice, not to help the manufacturer sell more units. And if as a reviewer you only ever say nice things, how can anyone trust what you're saying? You're a salesman, an advertiser at that point, not a reviewer. I've published quite a lot of reviews, some very positive and some very negative, and the positive ones only carry weight because I only give positive feedback to products that I genuinely feel deserve it, not everything that comes through my door. But even in the situations where I've done some at times quite brutally negative reviews, I've never had a response like this before. And I can give you some examples of some times when manufacturers have handled negative coverage much better. TNA, for example. I did a review of the TNA DAC 200 and it was fairly mixed, and I criticized some of the objective behaviors of that product, such as the inability to handle intersample overs. A week or so after the video went out, one of the lead engineers reached out to me and said, hey, that's a great point. Thank you very much. We're going to have a look at mitigating that in a future firmware update. Or a recent one. I've got to give a big shout out and props to EMM Labs or Meitner. I did a review of the Meitner MA3, which is a very expensive DAC, and it was fairly negative. Amadeus Meitner reached out on Facebook and said, hey, thank you very much for the time taken to do the video. It's a shame you didn't like it, but there's got to be some negative to balance out the positive. And then he also offered to arrange some review units for other products in future, or to set up an interview with the engineering team. Just about the most gentlemanly and perfect response you could possibly ask for. Big props to Meitner. I really wish more companies would behave like that. I'd like to sincerely thank everyone at headphones.com for their support in this matter. They did not have to do the things that they are doing, including just providing me this platform to tell you guys that this is even happening. The Bartok video was published on my channel before I joined headphones.com. It's nothing to do with them, but this is important to talk about. This is newsworthy. This is something the community should be aware of, and I think should be fought back against, because this sets a very dangerous precedent. One that means that reviewers can't give honest feedback on products, because they now have to be worried that if this sort of behavior continues, if they don't say nice things about a product, they will just be sued. I would also really like to thank both Amir and Jussi for your input on some of these points. I really, really appreciate your help. This wasn't a video that I wanted to make, but felt that it was important to do so. The easiest thing to do would have just been take the video down, comply with DCS's demands, and don't worry about it anymore. But that would not have been the right thing to do. That would have been a disservice to my audience and a disservice to other reviewers, and encourage this kind of behavior to perpetuate. So I'm going to defend this. I'm going to talk about this. All of the communications have been provided in full for full transparency. That's all I have to say on the matter for now. Thanks for watching.